My husband said he was at work. He wasn't. Day one. The lie. I never considered myself the jealous type. I wasn't the kind of wife who pried through text messages or second-guessed every late-night meeting. I believed in trust, in privacy, in giving a person space. But that night, as I lay alone in bed, staring at the ceiling, something gnawed at me. It was subtle at first, like an itch just beneath my skin, a restless energy I couldn't shake. The house was quiet, the digital clock on the nightstand blinking 42 a.m., casting soft red glows across the room. He had texted earlier, saying work was running late. Some last-minute crisis at the firm. Nothing unusual. And yet, something felt wrong. I turned over, staring at his side of the bed. The sheets were cold, untouched. That whisper of unease grew louder. Check his location. I almost didn't do it. It felt ridiculous. Childish even. But my hands moved on their own, reaching for my phone, unlocking the screen with a swipe. My breath caught in my throat as I opened the tracking app. He wasn't at work. My heart skipped. The little red dot, the one that should have been in the heart of the city where his office was somewhere else. A town. A small town. 2 hours away. I frowned, tapping on the name. Willow Ridge. I had never heard of it. My stomach twisted into a knot so tight it hurt. I sat up, gripping the phone with both hands, my pulse thrumming beneath my fingertips. There had to be a reasonable explanation. A work trip, a meeting, but deep down I already knew. I just didn't know how bad it was going to be. Day 2, the drive. I barely slept. By the time the sun crawled over the horizon, painting the bedroom in soft morning light, I had already made up my mind. I wasn't going to ask him. I was going to follow him. I kissed him goodbye like any other morning, smiling as he told me he'd be working late again. I watched him pull out of the driveway, my hands clenched into fists. Then I waited. 10 minutes. Exactly 10 minutes. Just long enough for him to believe I was going about my day, none the wiser. Then I grabbed my keys and got in the car. The drive felt endless. Every mile stretched longer than the last. The further I went, the less familiar everything became. The city skyline faded behind me, replaced by long stretches of road, quiet farmlands, and dense patches of trees. I gripped the wheel tighter, my knuckles turning white. He had to have an explanation. He had to. But when I finally turned onto the street, my breath caught in my throat. It was quiet. Peaceful. A picturesque suburban neighborhood straight out of a magazine. Neatly trimmed lawns, white picket fences, the faint sound of children's laughter ringing through the air. And then I saw him. I slammed my foot on the brake, barely registering the honk of an irritated driver behind me. He was there. Not just there. Smiling, laughing, carrying a bag of groceries up a driveway like he belonged there. Then, before I could even process what I was looking at, she stepped into view. A woman. She was beautiful in a simple, effortless way. Dark hair pulled into a ponytail, a soft sundress flowing as she moved toward him, and then she kissed him. Not a quick peck, not a friendly touch. A lingering kiss. A kiss between a man and his wife. I felt my stomach drop. My hands started to shake as I watched them walk inside together, side by side like they had done it 1,000 times before. And suddenly I understood. This wasn't an affair. This wasn't some meaningless fling. This was a life. A life he had built, without me. Day 3. The confrontation. I didn't sleep. The hours stretched endlessly as I lay in my motel bed, staring at the stained ceiling, listening to the muffled sounds of the highway outside. My mind raced in frantic circles, replaying what I had seen over and over again, searching for some other explanation. Any explanation that made sense. There wasn't one. Morning came too soon. The sky was still a soft, dusky pink when I finally forced myself into the car and drove back to the house. My body was running on pure adrenaline, my hands trembling as I gripped the steering wheel. I had no plan, no strategy. I just knew I had to face him. I had to see him. By the time I stepped onto the porch, my pulse was hammering so hard I thought I might collapse. I raised my fist and knocked. The door swung open, and there she was. Up close, she was even more stunning than I had realized. Not in a threatening, model-perfect way, just effortlessly beautiful, with deep brown eyes, soft features, and the kind of warmth that made a person feel instantly safe. She looked like the kind of woman who made homemade soup on rainy days and sent thank you cards just because. She looked like a wife. "Can I help you?" she asked, tucking a stray piece of hair behind her ear. Her voice was gentle. She had no idea. I swallowed the lump in my throat, trying to remember how to breathe. Say something. Say anything. I'm looking for my husband. I finally managed, though my voice barely came out. She frowned, tilting her head slightly. "I'm sorry, I think you have the wrong house." And then, he stepped out from behind her. The world stopped. The moment his eyes met mine, I saw it. Recognition, panic, guilt. He knew exactly who I was, and yet his hand was resting casually on her waist, like it belonged there. Before I could speak, the woman turned to him, completely unaware of the storm raging inside me. "Baby, who is this?" Baby. My stomach twisted violently. My nails dug into my palms so hard I thought they might draw blood. I turned to her, the words clawing their way up my throat. My voice was barely a whisper. "This is my husband." Silence. The world seemed to hold its breath. She let out a short, breathless laugh, the kind you give when someone tells a joke you don't quite understand. Then she turned back to him, waiting, expecting him to deny it. But he didn't. His face, God, his face. He didn't look shocked. He didn't look confused. He looked caught. The air shifted, her shoulders tense, the warmth draining from her eyes as she studied him, searching for something, anything, to tell her that I was lying. He said nothing. Her breath hitched. She took a slow, shaky step away from him, like she was seeing him for the first time. What is she talking about? But I already knew. I saw it in her eyes, the way the pieces were clicking into place. She wasn't his mistress. She was his wife. Day 4. The unraveling. The story didn't come out cleanly. It was jagged and broken, torn from the mouth of a man who was suddenly out of lies. 15 years. That's how long he had been married to her. A decade and a half of anniversaries, birthday parties, and lazy Sunday mornings. A life built on vows he had never truly meant. They had a son, a 14-year-old boy who looked just like him, a house filled with photos of their perfect family, a dog, neighbors who adored him. My stomach twisted violently. 15 years. That meant I wasn't the first wife. The words slipped out of my mouth like poison, my voice shaking. His wife, his real wife, stared at me, lips parted, eyes hollow. No, she whispered. My throat felt tight like a rope was being pulled around it, squeezing the air from my lungs. I wasn't his first wife. I was his second, and she wasn't the other woman. I was. The air between us felt too thick, too heavy to breathe. I wanted to scream, to break something, to wrap my hands around his throat and demand to know how he could look me in the eye every day and still kiss me goodbye like I was his one and only. But I couldn't, because the pain wasn't sharp. It was deep. It was raw. I had been living a lie. And then just when I thought it couldn't get worse, she turned to me. Her hands were shaking, her voice barely a whisper. I think there's another one. Day 5. The truth is a monster. The moment she said it, something inside me cracked. We didn't speak. We just moved. We tore through his things like desperate, starving animals searching for scraps of truth. Bank statements, different addresses, hidden accounts, fake names. And then we found her, the third wife, a woman who had been married to him for 8 years. She had twin daughters. She thought he was on work trips when in reality he was here, with us. She had no idea she was just another chapter in his twisted story. He didn't have a double life. He had a triple life. But that wasn't the worst part. No, the worst part came when his first wife, his real wife, went to his closet, pulled down an old shoebox tucked away on the highest shelf, and opened it with trembling fingers. Inside, beneath layers of dust and secrets, was a lockbox. She picked the lock with a bobby pin, her breath hitching as the lid popped open. We leaned in, and the world shifted. Old driver's licenses, fake IDs, different names, different faces, but all him. And beneath them, newspaper clippings. Missing women. Women who had once been married to him. Women who had vanished. I felt the blood drain from my face. We weren't the first. And if we didn't act fast, we wouldn't be the last. Day 6. The escape. We played it cool. We smiled when he spoke, nodded at his excuses, pretended we believed him when he said, "This isn't what it looks like." We let him hold on to the illusion that he still had control, that his world wasn't crumbling beneath him. But beneath the surface, we were calculating. That night, when he thought we were broken, when he thought we were grieving the love we had lost, we met in secret. 3 women, 3 lives stolen, rewritten by a man who had turned love into a game of manipulation and deception. We sat in a dimly lit diner, hands gripping coffee cups, voices hushed but urgent. "He's dangerous," the first wife whispered. "He's a liar," the second, me, muttered. "He's a monster," the third one said, her fingers trembling as she wiped away tears. We weren't just victims. We were survivors. And we had a choice. We could run, disappear into the night and pretend this never happened, try to rebuild the lives he had shattered. Or we could make sure he never did this again. It wasn't a question. We all knew the answer, so we made a plan. A real one. One that accounted for every possible move he could make. One that ensured he would never be able to hurt another woman again. We spent hours going over the details, mapping it out carefully, making sure nothing could go wrong. Because if it did, if we slipped, even for a second, he would know. And we knew what happened to the women who had found out the truth before us. By the time dawn approached, we were ready. And when he came home that night, smiling, unsuspecting, slipping through the front door like he always did, ready to live yet another life, we were waiting. And he would never walk out that door again. Moral of the story: some secrets can't be forgiven. Some betrayals don't deserve a second chance. And sometimes, when the truth is a monster, you have to become one to survive.